Welcome to the Week 10 lecture for QSO-600 Operations Management. I apologize if my voice is a bit hoarse, but I'm fighting a bit of a cold, but I will try to make it as clear as possible for everyone involved. This week we're going to cover basically customer satisfaction factors. So we're going to talk about the voice of the customer. The customer is part of the system, and then we're going to talk about how the customer perceives value. I'm going to briefly discuss the Kano model. I've discussed this in earlier weeks. I skirted around it, but I'm going to go into more detail here. And then I'm going to talk about TQM Customer Strategies. And inside here, I'm going to go a little bit through internal customers and the concept of internal customers as it applies to operations processes. So what is the voice of the customer? The voice of the customer is, in general, how the customer is represented in operations planning and product design. And in general, we have three types of customers. We have the major customers, those who purchase our products. Very frequently, they represent the majority of the customers that use our product or service. We have minor customers, customers that may only occasionally use our product. And then we have internal customers, ones we don't talk about a lot, but these are those inside the organization who receive work from another process and whose work is required to add value to the service or product that the overall operations strategy is trying to perform. I will go into internal customers in more detail, but TQM focuses on all three types of customers in different ways. Major customers, we like to go through and receive direct feedback from major customers. A lot of people like to talk about surveys and stuff, but in TQM, you normally find that although surveys may be used, it's not relied upon as a major driver for understanding how customers perceive quality. In many TQM type organizations, they focus on direct interactions because, as you're going to see later on, all interactions with a company influence how customers perceive quality. So internal customers, this is very important. These are the people inside the organization who do the work that's related to the product or service. And there's a saying that TGO used to say, the next process is the customer. So I'm going to go into more detail in a minute, but internal customers have to have a certain mindset which allows them to function as a system with other individuals in the company. So total TQM focuses on aligning processes to its value chain. And basically what the value chain is those processes within the entire system that provide value to the customer. In many cases, you'll find that there are some processes that don't add value to the customer, at least not directly. In this case, you have unwanted waste and you have necessary waste. But in general, when we talk about lean, we try to identify the value chain. What processes within a chain of processes that provide direct value to the customer. And then we focus on how they provide value. So when we look at the customer as part of a system, we begin with idea zero. So idea zero, step zero is the idea. And this is where the customer wants and needs and desires are. It's translated into something that can be created within the system. So this is usually the job of marketing, to understand what the customer wants and how you are going to provide value. And then, so once the initial customer inputs are received by marketing and a general outline of what the customer wants is created, we move to the product design and redesign. In many cases, you'll hear this being called the voice of the engineer. This is the engineer's perception of what the customer wants. And this is where the specifications come from for how things are going to be created. In a process, when you look at process, sometimes you hear the specifications called the voice of the customer. And this is because this is the voice of the customer as manifest in the design. Sometimes you hear it called the voice of the engineer. It just depends. I've heard both. But within the larger concept, the voice of the customer is initially conceived at step zero. This is from Deming. He he created this, and I've added a few things for it to it. But so once marketing receives that, then we design it, get voice of the engineer, and this is flowed down to our suppliers, who then provide the parts or supplies in order to create the product. Now this is geared mainly for manufacturing, so but services can be worked in a similar manner. You basically have to have the start in a service function. Usually the customer is at the beginning. Like for instance, on this graph, this is all service related. I'm going to go through that in a minute. But this is the manufacturing site here. So then receiving receives the parts, production builds everything after receiving, provides the parts. Then once it's built, we have an inspection process to make sure that the product meets the specifications. Once again, this is where the voice of the customer is kind of tested. And then once it passes that, we go to distribution, goes to the customer. Then the customer uses the product. And in TQM, we have a closed loop here. Once the customer uses it, we have product use here. We end up with a customer feedback section. I call it product support. Sometimes you hear it called after sales support or whatever. But this is actually a very important part of the quality step, because this is where we close the loop on a PDCA type function, in which we look at where we deviated from what the customer wanted based upon what we understand for step 0. And then once you do that, then we go to the redesign section, where the engineer or marketing or whoever looks at how we can improve the product so it aligns more with the voice of the customer, which is now part of the customer feedback. So in this regard, all steps are part of the value chain. All of these provide value, and it is very important to understand that the service side of this is just as important in quality as the manufacturing side. I'm going to go over that in more detail in a minute, but basically all customer interactions with the company, either with the product or with the company directly, influences how the customer perceives quality. And that's very important. In many cases, you'll see where companies will build a good product and then have poor after-sales support, because the old adage is customers don't pay for after-sales support, so the money's made in the product. But future sales can rely heavily on this if the customer perception with their experience in after-sales support is poor. If you have poor after-sales support and good manufacturing, you have poor quality, and that's very important. I'm going to go through that more in a minute. So, how does the customer perceive value? This is very important. You could read all different kinds of theories on how the customer perceives value, but in general, the customer only knows what he or she is offered. Like for instance, when the car was invented, people didn't say, you know what, I wanted a car. All they knew was that the current mode of transportation was inefficient for what they wanted to do. So it was when the people who invented the car, and that's depends on who you listen to, when they transferred their understanding of what the customer wanted into something tangible, then all of a sudden the customer said, oh, this is what I like. So all the customer really knows is what they want or need. When we go back to the car, all they knew is that the current mode of transportation was inefficient. The horses make a mess all over the place. There's a lot of upkeep with horses, and they wanted something that was more efficient than a horse. So, they didn't go out and say, you know what, I could really use a car about now. So that's important to understand. Customers do not exactly know what kind of product they want. All they know is what you offer them, and that's very important. So customers pay attention to the product characteristics and how they meet these wants and needs. So when you offer something new to a market, customers will look at how their wants and needs are manifest, and then they'll look at how current products in the market provide for those wants and needs, and then they compare that to what you offer. And this is part of the company's value proposition. They say, based upon what value characteristics you provide, high quality, low cost, high cost, whatever, they look at how your product will meet these wants and needs beyond what current products provide. And if you provide something that's peculiar or that does it better than what existing products do, then you will get customers to buy your product. So, as I mentioned earlier, customer interactions are also part of the customer perception of quality. The customer perception of quality does not end with purchasing the product. When they go to a show, like um, staying with the example of the car, if a customer goes to a car showroom and they have a very poor time trying to buy a car, they're going to remember that. And they may like your car, but they go, well, yeah, but do I want to go through all the trouble of having to buy a car if I'm going to get harassed by the showroom? Or, if there's a small problem that my car has, how efficient and how well did the company address my concerns? And this is also important because, um, as I say here, good products plus poor service equals poor quality. This is very important. The good products, the product must have good service. All interactions with a company must be good in order to have good quality. So this is why TQM focuses a lot on service interaction, because the service interactions provide an important feedback mechanism for improving quality. As I mentioned earlier, surveys are a very good part, but surveys have limitations. For instance, the surveys will only tell you what the survey is designed to tell. And you also have certain various biases. Some people don't like to fill out surveys. Some people may bias highly or bias poorly. Um, there's an old study that showed that people provide feedback only if they had a very good or very poor experience. The people who just had a normal experience, but those people who may be the majority of the customers that may have good feedback, they won't fill out your survey. So surveys have limitations. So we focus a lot on direct customer interaction as much as possible. Obviously, in some instances, it's not possible, but in a TQM operations, you really want to have be as close to the customer as possible when you get your feedback. So here's the Kano model. The Kano model is a very good graphic understanding of how the customer perceives the value from your product. You have three general sections. You have this green section that's up here, and these are the delighters. If your product attribute falls in this area, these are items that delight the customer. These were unexpected attributes that actually has a positive effect on their perception. So now they will be more likely to like your product. So in the middle we have this blue line, and anything that sits in here is the more is better. Basically what this says is that it's not a delighter, but if I can have more of it, I'll be happy. A good example is like when you go to McDonald's and you get the super size for a lot less money. That's a more is better strategy, where the fries aren't any much better, but you get more of them, so you'll like it more. So that's more is better. So anything that fits in here is a more is better. And then down here, you have the must-haves. So must-haves, these attributes must be in the product, or else the customer will not be satisfied. Now, what is important to understand is that delighters will slowly shift to more is better, because as a customer uses a product and they get more used to these delighters, they begin to expect it. Now they want more of it, so more is better. And then the more is better eventually becomes a must-have. Okay. Now, if you go too far down, where basically the further down this line you go, the more dissatisfied the customer is. Even down here, the must-haves will slowly be moved down here, such that there'll be more must-haves. You must be able to have more attributes in your product for the customer to like it, which is important, because if you do not fulfill any of these must-haves, the customer will be dissatisfied. So, internal customers. This is a very important concept. So, internal customers is everyone within a certain operations strategy that adds value to a process, to a product or service that provides value to a customer. So when we look at internal customers, they need to know three things. They need to know what they require from their suppliers. So basically, every internal customer has a supplier, and then they have a customer. So they receive stuff from their supplier, and then they add value to it. Then it moves on to their customer. So they need to know how the particular process adds value to the external customer. So this is how we align everything in the value chain to the external customer. This is an important step because in many cases I've seen where the internal customer strategy ignores this. And they say, well, I just need this to do my job and you're my supplier, therefore you need to provide this to me, without understanding how this input adds value to the external customer. In many cases, it's just a waste of time. Or their customer may be a manager that wants something a certain way. So as a result, we drift away from external customers and start to move towards what internal customers want. So when you deal with this, you need to both focus on what the internal customer requires them to add value and how the particular process adds value to the external customer. Ideally, these are aligned so that these interactions are maximized to add value as it relates to the external customer. In one instance, when I was working in California, I saw where this was attempted, and the internal customers took ownership of this, and they began to be very demanding, but they wouldn't focus on the external customer. They said, well, I require this for my job, and since you are my supplier, I need you to provide this. And it became very nasty after a certain time. So this is where management needs to really step in, especially when you have a functional team in which you may have different disciplines working together to create a product, because as I say here, traditional stroke piping discourages internal customer collaboration. And this is very true because each internal customer may be measured differently. So to do this, you need to change the measurements so that the measurements are directly linked to customer value, both external and internal. And it's important to remember that external customers are the overall judge of quality, not internal customers. So if your internal customer demands something from you and it doesn't add value to the external customer, then you're not adding value, you're just wasting time. So TQM Customer Strategies, it's very simple. You identify your customers, and then in the references that I have, they basically talk about major customers, minor customers, current customers, and former customers. It doesn't hurt to find out why former customers no longer use our product, so that you may either add attributes to your product to address these, or you may, well, sometimes you may say, well, they're no longer in our niche and we may not be able to bring them back. But sometimes you can get some valuable information from former customers. The competitors' customers, this is how you figure out how your product attributes align with what your competitor offers. This is where the Kano model kind of aligns with your customer satisfaction here. And then customers who use substitute products or services. Don't forget, customers only know what they're offered. So for you to understand fully what they expect from your product, it's nice to know what they expect from substitute products or services as well, so that you don't, you know how to add value based upon how the Kano model works. You know, what are delighters? You know, how can we add some delighters in to make them like our products more? Because if they can get the same level of satisfaction from a substitute product, then your leverage to charm the customer into buying your product is definitely decreased. So once you do this, you identify the value chain. In this step, I didn't say this, but you model out all the processes. How do the processes flow? And what this does, this focuses on interactions between everybody. Who interacts with who? And then once you figure it out, you look at the process they do and how their process adds value to the customer. And then at that point, You can understand what could be waste, what cannot be waste, and then you start your improvement measures within each of the processes. But you would include, ideally, in my experience, you include that process, the customer, their internal customer, and their internal supplier, as well as someone to represent the customer, so that you get an overall well-rounded understanding of the value chain as it applies to your particular operation strategy. So as it says here, this requires understanding of customer perceptions and expectations. And this is where including some form of quote unquote voice of the customer comes in. We want to make sure that our specifications actually match what the customer wants. Okay. So now, at this point, we compare customers to the company value proposition. And this is a part of branding that communicates to a customer what product traits the company competes on. For instance, if you're our Mercedes, you focus on high cost, luxury, high quality. If you're Toyota, you may focus on medium cost, high quality, not luxury. Or in some cases, they may break up different brands like Toyota, I think they have Lexus, I think. If I'm wrong, please forgive me. I'm not a very good person as far as cars go. But, let's say that Toyota had Lexus. Toyota could be their mid-range luxury item, and their Lexus could be their high-end luxury item. But since they both occupy the high-quality spectrum, then that is a very good way to meet more than one segment of customers. I posted a lecture that I created on branding during the week, so if you have any questions, please watch that. If you can't find it, let me know, and I'll see if I can post it to the classroom again. So we also want to consider internal customer value chain requirements as well. And this goes back to our discussion with internal customers. So then we create feedback mechanisms between the company and the customer. And this is important because we don't just focus on surveys. The key is to increase complaints while also increasing quality. And it's not so much increasing bad complaints, it's increasing feedback from the customer. So they may be complaints is very general in this sense, and they are basically just how the customer perceives our product. You may have good complaints, you can have bad complaints. So we take all these and we use a PDCA type system to receive the complaints and apply them to product offerings. So as we determine how our product meets customer requirements, we can go internally to our operation strategy and then apply this quote unquote voice of the customer to internal processes to make them better. And as I said, I usually recommend that for each process you have the person who owns the process, their supplier, their customer, and then someone who represents the customer, so that they have a good understanding of how all of that meshes together to provide value to the customer. So increasing complaints means to increase the capability of the customer to provide feedback to the company. TQM companies want a lot of feedback. They want people to feel comfortable talking to them about their product. But many company incentives discourage this type of strategy because you may have marketing people who are rated on the level of feedback that they get. How many people like our product. So you may have incentives that discourage this. So therefore, you need to look at the marketing incentives to make sure that your data doesn't get skewed based upon whatever metrics you have for customer satisfaction. So, and that's a good point here. Customers do not know what they want until they see it. So all we can do is listen to them and then conceptualize what they're telling us and then apply it to our product. And then when they see it and they like it, they will tell us. The next feedback may be more positive. Or they may say, well, that's kind of what I wanted, but not quite. So then, we would change it again. This is an ongoing loop between getting feedback, applying the feedback, and then selling to the customer, and then getting the feedback again and going on as go along. So that is all. Just a quick discussion on how the customer satisfaction is applied within TQM. I just briefly went over the generalities, but I feel that I gave you the main parts. If there's any questions, please feel free to post them in class, and I will answer them and see what I can about getting you the information. So thank you very much for listening to this, and I look forward to your feedback in class. Thank you. Bye-bye.